This is it. We are here at the final week of my Spooktober challenge. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, but I'm ready for the home stretch. Let's do this. Today I rewatched The Blair Witch Project. I didn't find this as scary as when I first watched it, but I still think it's really good. The acting is great, everyone in the film gives performances that are completely believable. It has really good character conflict that escalates as the movie goes on. Couple that with the supernatural occurrences of the film, and you get a movie about these characters slowly descending into madness. This is a movie that works whether you're frightened by it or not. Even though I wasn't scared this time around because I knew what to expect, it still left me unsettled and I was consistently engaged throughout its runtime. This movie is so dedicated to realism that if you didn't know it was fake, you could still easily be fooled into thinking it's real. A lot of people thought this movie was real back in 1999, and most people realize it's fake nowadays. But every once in a while, I'll have a friend watch it for the very first time who has no knowledge of the movie, and afterwards they are convinced that the events of the film were real. And I think that's a testament to the effectiveness of this movie. Today I watched Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Yeah, I'm watching another Wes Craven movie. I figured if there's any time to explore a horror director's filmography, it's during this challenge. New Nightmare is the movie Wes Craven made right before Scream. After many Nightmare on Elm Street sequels had already come out, Wes Craven returns to the franchise to try to revitalize it. Because he made this movie right before Scream, there are a lot of similarities between both of these movies. Both have similar themes, they explore media sensationalism and how horror movies affect people. Like Scream, this is also a movie full of meta commentary, but this is even more meta than Scream, because it's not a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, it's a movie about making Nightmare on Elm Street movies. All the actors in the movie play themselves, and it focuses on Freddy Krueger coming into the real world in the midst of a production of another Nightmare movie. This is a really cool concept that's executed pretty well for the most part. All the kills by Freddy are done in a way where it could easily be explained away, and it makes the characters who are experiencing this horror look really crazy to everyone else in the movie. However, despite this being more meta, I do think Scream is the better movie. And I think that's because Scream is very fun, and it never takes itself too seriously. New Nightmare, on the other hand, does take itself too seriously to the point where it feels melodramatic and silly at times. Some of the scary scenes come off as unintentionally funny for this very reason. Another issue it has is that it focuses on Heather's kid, which is a problem because it's a very young child actor, so obviously his performance is really bad. But beyond that, everything surrounding the kid's story just isn't all that good. For example, there's the scene where he climbs on top of a playground and nearly falls to his death, but his mother catches him, and afterwards he says,
"God wouldn't take me."
I'm sorry, but that's just hilarious. Anytime this movie was focused on the kid's story, I felt the experience was very weak. And unfortunately, that takes up a lot of the movie's runtime. It could have worked as a side story in the background, but it's focused on way too much here. I love what this movie is trying to be, but I feel pretty mixed about what the movie actually is. The ideas here could have led to a really awesome movie had some of the execution been a bit better, but as it stands, this movie is just okay. The way I see it, this was just a test run for the ideas that would be executed much better in Scream. Today, I had a Frankenstein double feature. I rewatched the 1931 original and its sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein. Frankenstein is of course legendary and iconic. Its gothic imagery and atmosphere is synonymous with the horror genre. Almost 90 years later, it is still the definitive on-screen version of the story. Boris Karloff's portrayal is basically the only image you can think of when you bring up Frankenstein's monster. The imagery in this movie is so ingrained into our culture that we have become desensitized to it. But I can only imagine how this movie shook people back in 1931. What I really like about Frankenstein though, and what I really like about all the Universal monster movies, is that he is portrayed as very human. We're not just supposed to feel scared of Frankenstein's monster, we're actually meant to feel sympathy for him. And this is something that is greatly expanded upon in the sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein. I think this is one of the best sequels ever made. It improves upon the original in almost every way. This movie has comedy, horror, heartwarming scenes, and heartbreaking scenes. It's a really powerful experience, and that's because of how it builds upon the foundation of the first movie. It uses the themes from the original and takes them even further. The theme from the first movie of playing with life and death is expanded upon by the scientists wanting to create an entire race of artificial humans. And the few moments of humanity we saw from the monster in the original are turned into his entire character here. In this movie, he is a lonely, misunderstood, and mistreated man who longs for acceptance and belonging. It makes his story in the movie hit that much harder. These movies are really great, and if you haven't seen them yet, maybe you've been putting them off because they're older movies, I definitely recommend giving them a shot because their emotional and thematic cores still hold up really well today, even if they're not very scary anymore. Today I watched Young Frankenstein. This is a spoof movie by Mel Brooks, and it's a classic horror comedy that I haven't tried to watch until now. And I'll say it's pretty good. It's shot really well, it's got lots of visual style that emulates the 1930s, it's funny and witty, it's well acted with Gene Wilder in particular giving a great comedic performance. If there's anything I have against this movie, it's just that most of it isn't my brand of humor. It got a few chuckles out of me here and there, but I found a lot of the humor to be really corny. Now that doesn't detract from the quality of the movie, but it just means that I didn't love this one like some other people do. Like I said, I think it's pretty good, but this isn't one I'm going to be clamoring to rewatch anytime soon. Today I watched The Lighthouse. This is the new horror film by Robert Eggers, director of The Witch. I was already looking forward to this movie because I think The Witch is not only one of the best horror movies of this decade, but one of the best movies of this decade, period. So when I heard people saying that this was even better, I got pumped. And I can confirm, this is even better than The Witch. Robert Eggers is a madman and a genius. Every shot in this movie is beautiful and perfect. The acting by Dafoe and Pattinson is phenomenal. Pattinson knocks it out of the park. If Good Time didn't prove to the world that he was a good actor, then this certainly will. I love the pacing of the story here. It's much improved from The Witch. I remember The Witch being a bit dull at times when I first watched it because of its slow pacing. And while I've grown to appreciate that pacing, The Lighthouse is able to achieve a lot of the same things with more even pacing, meaning that I was consistently engaged throughout. But what really sucked me in and kept my eyes glued to the screen was the character conflict. At the end of the day, this is a story about two men driving each other insane. Watching these characters struggle against each other until they're at their wits' end was enthralling. This is a movie about power and the struggle for power. It has lots of allusions to Greek mythology. Couple all of this with the vague and unclear way some events in the movie are presented, and this is a movie that had me and a friend theorizing about interpretations and meanings for a long time after watching it. Robert Eggers really outdid himself. This is a truly great movie that I hope gets tons of recognition during award season. I would give this movie a solid 10. It might honestly be my favorite movie of the year. I'm using another skip day today. I mean, honestly, I could stop right now if I wanted to because the goal of this challenge was to watch 31 movies and I've done that already, but stopping now would be a buzzkill, and I've got a few more movies I want to watch, so I'm gonna keep going. Today I watched Trick or Treat. This is an anthology movie where the stories interconnect. Kind of, but we'll get to that. I started out the movie really liking it. I thought it was pretty fun. The first story followed Kurt Connors from Spider-Man 2 as he murders kids on Halloween. He gave a really great performance and he really carried the story. It was the right blend of creepy and funny, and there's a twist at the end that just makes the story even better. But everything after this story is pretty bad. There's this story about these kids trick-or-treating, and it's just not good. It's mainly due to the child actors, who all give terrible performances. But beyond their performances, the story isn't scary or funny at all, even though it was trying to be both. Then there's this story about this group of girls trying to get their virgin friend laid. It was okay, but then there's a plot twist at the end that makes no sense, and is so bad that it ruins other scenes in the movie. Every character in this story is horny. There's a lot of characters in this movie in general who are horny for no reason, which is one of my least favorite horror movie cliches. Unless it's in a Friday the 13th movie, then it's okay. The last story that was about a grumpy old man was okay, and the best one besides the first story. There are some really good practical effects on display here every once in a while, but that's really the only compliment I can give this movie as a whole. I also want to mention the score because it really got on my nerves and I didn't think it was very good. And the way these stories connect to each other is so trite and inconsequential. It would honestly be better if the stories had nothing to do with each other. A lot of people love this movie and I was excited to watch it, so I was disappointed when it turned out to be this bad. I almost saved it to watch on Halloween Day, but now I'm really glad I did not do that, as that would have been a terrible way to end the month. The moral of the story here is that I really want to see The Lighthouse again. Today I rewatched Psycho. This is such a timeless classic, and it's one of my favorite movies because it is a prime example of just how good movies can be. The first time I watched this years ago, I was blown away. Even rewatching it, I was still on the edge of my seat, and that's because everything in this movie is made to invoke fear and tension. The music, the characters, the story, the lighting, and shots are all masterfully crafted to make you feel uneasy. 60 years after its release, and there are still very few movies as effective as this at engaging the audience. This movie has been so iconic and influential within our culture that there's not much else I can say about it other than I agree with everyone else, and it is an absolute masterpiece. Today, I rewatched Child's Play. I wasn't originally going to rewatch one of these movies since I already did a 30-minute ramble on the entire franchise not too long ago, but I ultimately decided that I'd be cheating myself if I didn't watch a Chucky movie during October. However, this first movie isn't my favorite one in the franchise, and that's because it's committed to being a serious horror movie, and I just don't find Chucky all that scary. That is not to say that there aren't effective moments in the movie though. The scene where the mom picks up the box and the batteries fall out is great. It's an oh shit moment, and it leads to another tense moment where she opens them up.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
It is just a great scene, and I love it. Beyond my personal bias against not finding Chucky scary though, I do feel this would be scarier if they changed a few things. Namely, if they cut out the opening scene that shows Charles Lee Ray putting himself in the doll. The reason I say this is when the movie gets going, there is no sense of mystery to the character. You already know the doll is possessed. Whereas if the movie didn't show you that happening, it would be a lot creepier because you wouldn't know that for sure. It would also make the scenes where Andy is being accused of the killings a lot more effective. You would not know for sure whether the doll is possessed, so you would have to genuinely wonder if the kid killed his babysitter. However, because of the opening scene, we do know that the doll is possessed by a killer, so there's no mystery as to who did the killings. As an audience member, you just spend the first half of the movie waiting for the adults to find out the same information that you know already. But like I said, changing this would just be an improvement on an already good movie. The animatronics here look awesome. They only improve as the movies go on, but even this first movie has some great looking stuff in it. And let's talk about the kid actor in this movie. Now, his performance isn't good most of the time, but it works because he isn't required to be anything other than a cute kid. However, there are a few scenes where his acting is genuinely impressive for a kid his age. Like I said before, I like some of the sequels better because they don't take themselves as seriously, and they flesh out the character of Chucky and give him a lot more screen time. And the more of Brad Dourif's Chucky performance we have, the happier I'll be, because he really makes the character. Chucky would not even be a blip on the radar for most horror fans if it was not for the personality that Brad Dourif brought to the character. I could go on and on about the movie because I really have grown to love this franchise over the past year, but I'll just go ahead and wrap up and say that this is a good movie. Alright, this is it guys. Tomorrow is Halloween! On Halloween Day, I rewatched The Exorcist. However, I didn't watch the theatrical cut, which is the version that I watched years ago. I watched the director's cut, because that's the only version that I could find on home video. There's a lot of changes made to this cut of the movie that adds nearly 10 minutes to the runtime. And unfortunately, none of the changes improve the movie at all. In fact, most of them take away from the movie. For example, there are scenes where faces will just randomly appear for a second as if it's supposed to be a jump scare or something, and it's just silly and unnecessary. There's a lot of added scenes that don't add anything substantial to the narrative, but instead just serve to slow down the movie's pacing. They changed the beginning by opening it with the shot of the house instead of immediately cutting to the desert, and worst of all, they changed the ending, which completely undercuts the power of the original ending and leaves on a much weaker note. The theatrical version is by far the superior cut, and I'll definitely be going out of my way to try to find it on Blu-ray, because the director's cut, which in my experience is more widely available, is a weaker experience. Changes aside, I love The Exorcist. I love the way it characterizes demon possession and the act of exorcism itself. In this movie, it's not just a means to an end. It's an ancient ritual that has been abandoned by the church and that only a few elders still know how to perform. Contextualizing exorcisms in that way makes the act itself a lot more mystical and mysterious, and gives more weight to the evil they're about to wrestle with. I also love that when the exorcism is finally performed, there's no loud music to try to make you feel scared. It's just the pure, tense atmosphere that you feel when these priests start chanting against the demonic screams. Even after being parodied and ripped off over and over, this movie is still bonkers. It's effective at unsettling and disturbing you, but more than that, it presents a great story with great characters. It's a masterpiece of supernatural horror that has yet to be outdone, and I felt it was the perfect way to end the month. I did it! It's over! I watched 35 movies in 31 days, and I only used 2 of my skip days. So I'd say that this challenge was a huge success, and I'm happy I was able to stick with it even though many days I didn't even want to watch a movie and I wish that I hadn't done this challenge at all. I was able to see a lot of movies that I hadn't seen before and revisit some old favorites that I hadn't seen in years. I could tell from the steadily declining view counts these videos have been getting that this challenge hasn't exactly been loved by you guys, so I appreciate you guys sticking with me and bearing with me through this challenge. The good news is, now that this is over, I can get back to making other videos. But not quite right now. I need a few days to take a break after this, because between this and my 30-minute Aeon Flux video that I released just before I started this, I am pretty worn out. But until my next video, I'm Randall the Vandal, and happy Halloween.